What would you answer if someone asked you what color is life? Life can be just about any color really, but if you think about it one way, life is green. Why? Well, let's look at it. Plants dominate the landscape of Earth. Where plants are plentiful, other organisms take hold and thrive. Plants are the basis for every food chain. They provide shelter, shade, and oxygen for animals of every size, shape, and kind. The oldest plant fossils date back approximately 470 million years ago. Since that time, plants have colonized and transformed nearly every corner of Earth. So what exactly is a plant? Well, you've got some compressed plant material handy. It's called paper and pencil. So get your writing materials ready and let's explore this wonderful botanical world of plants. Remember, wide right, skinny left. See you on the next slide. Plants are very different from animals, and we've already learned some of this stuff, so let's review just a little bit. Long ago, people questioned whether plants really were a living thing. They grow, reproduce, and metabolize as other living things, but they don't move, nor do they gather food. So what exactly is a plant? Well, as we've learned, a plant is multicellular and it is eukaryotic. What do those two things mean? Remember, it means they're made of more than one cell and they have a true nucleus. They not only have a cell membrane, but they have a cell wall made of a very tough carbohydrate called cellulose. This is what gives plant cells their structure and their rigidity. Plants also develop from multicellular embryos. Without even thinking about it, you eat plant embryos all the time when you eat seeds. Most importantly, though, plants carry out the process of photosynthesis along with respiration. In other words, they make their own food from carbon dioxide and water with sunlight as the source of energy. Surviving as a stationary organism on land is no easy task. But plants have developed a number of adaptations that allow them to succeed in some very different and sometimes some very harsh environments. Let's look at what the lives of plants depend on. Well, they depend on sunlight. In the same way that heat energy from an oven is needed to bake a cake, energy from the sun is needed to carry out photosynthesis. Plants display adaptations shaped by their need to gather sunlight. Photosynthetic organs, such as leaves, can be broad and flat or thin and needle-like. They can be arranged on a stem so as to gather as much sunlight as possible. All cells in a plant depend on a constant source of water and minerals too. For plants, water is one of the raw materials of photosynthesis, so it's used up very, very quickly on sunny days. Sunny conditions can also cause living tissues to dry out, like in a desert. So plants have adapted structures that limit their water loss. As they absorb water, they also absorb minerals. Minerals are nutrients that are in the soil that are needed for plant growth. Plants also require both oxygen for respiration and carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. This gas exchange with the atmosphere must take place without losing excessive amounts of water for evaporation. So again, plants have developed adaptations to ensure that this gas exchange happens with minimal water loss. Lastly, plants have to be able to move nutrients and water around the body of the plant. Water is taken up in the soil, but food is also produced in the leaves. So plants have to have a system in which the water can be moved up to the leaves for photosynthesis and food can be distributed throughout the plant body. We're going to look at a lot of these adaptations in the coming slides and in the coming days. For a very good chunk of Earth's history, land plants did not exist. Algae and photosynthetic prokaryotes, remember the things without a true nucleus, living in the water added oxygen to the atmosphere, and they were a food source for water creatures. Life was concentrated in oceans, lakes, and streams. Studying multicellular green algae that exists today, though, scientists were not sure that it should be included with organisms as large and complex as oaks and redwoods. They kind of didn't think it was really a plant. Its cells were similar in size and color and appearance to larger plants, but as they soon discovered, the similarities did not stop there. The algae that they looked at have a similar reproductive cycle to plants, and they have cell walls made of cellulose. Algae also contains the photosynthetic pigment chlorophyll. So scientists think that the earliest plant that exists was algae, very similar to the algae that we have today. So early plant life started in water. DNA sequences of today's plants prove that they are closely related to groups of green algae. As we've said, this strongly suggests then that ancient algae is indeed the ancestor of today's plants. Fossils of the first land plants, some 450 million years old, are also very similar in size and structure to the mosses that we see today in dim, damp places. The fossil record suggests that these were the first land plants, small and dependent on water to complete their life cycle, but very much like mosses today. Over time, adaptations that allowed plants to succeed further and further away from a water source more often included resistance to the drying UV rays of the sun, the ability to conserve water, and the ability to reproduce without water. So those adaptations allowed plants to live further and further away from sources of water. As plants appeared on land, colonized and thrived with these adaptations, the environment was forever changed. The existence of land plants allowed other organisms to develop and thrive on land as never before. New ecosystems formed, and life began to take many different directions. The life cycle of a plant is very different than that of animals, and we're going to talk about it on the next couple slides, but first a little background. Most cells in any living organism, plant or animal, are made of diploid cells, or cells with a full set of chromosome pairs. This is also noted as 2N, where N is the number of chromosomes in the organism. In humans, that number is 23, and it's different for every living thing. It's kind of an interesting thing to look up. How many chromosomes does an elephant have? How many chromosomes does a fruit fly have? The size of the animal or the size of the organism doesn't matter, but it's different for every single living thing. Some special cells, gametes or sex cells, are haploid. The number of chromosomes in the organism is half, or N. That means they have only a single set of chromosomes. When two haploid cells, or gametes, a male and a female, join, then the full set of chromosome pairs for the organism is restored. And those two terms are going to come into play in the next slide when we talk about the life cycle of a plant, and you'll see how different it is from an animal. Okay, so back to plants. As we said, plants have a life cycle that's very different from animals. And you can see it in the diagram here. It looks kind of different. We're going to talk about it here, so don't panic. Okay? Plants have two distinct phases in their life cycle. It's called the alternation of generations. Okay, so just sit tight and kind of listen, and then maybe listen again and take notes. The sporophyte phase is spore producing. Now that's kind of logical. The sporophyte phase is 2N. They have a full set of chromosome pairs. But the process of meiosis forms spores which are N, or haploid. These cells grow into new individuals, so we're following the diagram going down. These cells grow into new individuals that are haploid, and they're called gametophytes. The cells that make up gametophytes undergo mitosis, or cell duplication. and they produce gametes, or sex cells. These cells still have the haploid number, but they're either male or female, sperm or egg. When these two cells fuse in fertilization, they form a diploid sporophyte and the cycle starts all over again. Okay, so we've kind of followed that diagram. So while all of this sounds kind of confusing, here's what you need to remember. Plants have two distinct parts to their life cycle. One part has cells that are 2N or diploid. It's the sporophyte phase, they're spore producing, and it is formed by meiosis. Okay? Then we have the gametophyte phase. It is N or haploid. It is the gamete producing phase and is formed by mitosis. So, as we said, let's recap it one more time. Plants have two distinct parts to their life cycle. One part has cells that are 2N or diploid, while the other part has cells that are N or haploid. Animals have only diploid cells until they reach sexual maturity. Their body then produces some haploid cells, but the organism is still predominantly 2N. So animals can have both types of cells in their body at the same time, while plants only have one or the other, but not both. When we look at plants, and when botanists look at plants, they divide plants into four major groups. And here's the four major groups that we're going to talk about in this unit. And the following sets of notes are arranged in this order. First is the bryophytes. This includes mosses, as well as hornworts and liverworts. And we'll talk more about those coming up. It includes ferns and their relatives. We see some nice ferns here. There's some ferns growing over in Bear Creek Park if you look real carefully too. It includes gymnosperms. Gymnosperms include cone-bearing trees, but there are also other ones that are not cone-bearing trees that fall in the gymnosperm family. And lastly, the youngest but the largest group, the angiosperms. The angiosperms include all flowering plants, grasses, most of our leafy trees. There are some leafy trees that are gymnosperms, but most of the leafy trees, flowers, grasses, bushes, those are the angiosperms, and those are the youngest in terms of fossil age. So here are three things that you should be able to tell me, or you should be able to answer, related to this section of notes. What are the basic needs of a plant, and what do they do with them? How did the lack of water on land affect plant evolution? Or the relative lack of water. It wasn't a total lack of water, it was just water in some places and some not. And what feature defines a plant's life cycle? In other words, how is a plant's life cycle different than an animal's life cycle? Okay, you should be able to answer those questions. So, draw a line, give me a summary, and don't forget to go back and do your 6 questions. 3 level 1, 2 level 2, and 1 level 1. See you in class. Bye guys.